it's filming. So, and
if you ever find yourself stuck in the middle of the sea, I'll sail the world to find you. If you ever find yourself lost in the dark and you can't see, I'll be the light to guide you. Find out what we're made of when we are called to help our friends in need. You can count on me like 1, 2, 3, I'll be there. And I know when I need it, I can count on you. Like 4, 3, 2, and you'll be there. 'Cause that's what friends are supposed to do, oh yeah. Ooh, ooh, yeah, yeah. If you're tossing and you're turning and you just can't fall asleep, I'll sing a song beside you. And if you ever forget how much you really mean to me, every day I will remind you. Oh, find out what we're made of when we are called to help our friends in need. You can count on me like 1, 2, 3, I'll be there. And I know when I need it, I can count on you like 4, 3, 2, and you'll be there. 'Cause that's what friends are supposed to do. Ooh, yeah, yeah. You'll always have my shoulder when you cry. I'll never let go, never say goodbye. You know you can count on me like 1, 2, 3, I'll be there. And I know when I need it, I can count on you like 4, 3, 2, and you'll be there. 'Cause that's what friends are supposed to do, oh yeah. Ooh, ooh, you can count on me 'cause I can.
Hello everyone, welcome to our whole school assembly. Thought I'd start off with that great staff video this morning. Welcome. It'd be great to know who's watching us live on Facebook and YouTube. If you're tuning in, do say hello. We've got hello from hello everyone. Hi everyone from Philippa and Maiden Castle Farm. Good morning, Philippa. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Today in assembly, we thought we'd go back into the video archive and dig out some classic Power and Nori story times. So sit back, relax, and it's time for some stories.
My name is Julia, and I'm today going to read The Tiger Who Came to Tea. Once there was a little girl called Sophie, and she was having tea with her mummy in the kitchen. Suddenly, there was a ring at the door. Sophie's mummy said, "I wonder who that can be. It can't be the milkman because he came this morning, and it can't be the boy from the grocer because this isn't the day he comes, and it can't be Daddy because he's got his key. We better open the door and see." Sophie opened the door, and there was a big, furry, stripy tiger. The tiger said, "Excuse me, but I'm very hungry. Do you think I could have tea with you?" Sophie's mummy said, "Of course, come in." So the tiger came into the kitchen and he sat down at the table. Sophie's mummy said, "Would you like a sandwich?" But the tiger didn't just take one sandwich. He took all the sandwiches on the plate and swallowed them in one big mouthful. And he still looked hungry, so Sophie passed him the buns. But again, the tiger didn't just eat one bun. He ate all the buns on the dish, and then he ate all the biscuits and all the cake until there was nothing left to eat on the table. So Sophie's mummy said, "Would you like a drink?" And the tiger drank all the milk in the milk jug and all the tea in the teapot. And then he looked round the kitchen to see what else he could find. He ate all the supper that was cooking in the saucepans and all the food in the fridge and all the packets and all the tins in the cupboard. And he drank all the milk and all the orange juice and all of Daddy's beer and all the water in the tap. Then he said, "Thank you for my nice tea. I think I'd better go now." And he went. Sophie's mummy said, "I don't know what to do. I've got nothing for Daddy's supper. The tiger has eaten it all." And Sophie found she couldn't have a bath because the tiger had drunk all the water in the tap. And just then, Sophie's daddy came home. So Sophie and her mummy told him what had happened and how the tiger had eaten all the food and drunk all the drinks. And Sophie's daddy said, "I know what we'll do. I've got a very good idea. We'll put on our coats and go to a cafe." So they went out in the dark and all the street lamps were lit and all the cars had their lights on, and they walked down the road to a cafe. And they had a lovely supper with sausages and chips and ice cream. In the morning, Sophie and her mummy went shopping and they bought lots more things to eat. And they also bought a very big tin of tiger food in case the tiger should come to tea again. But he never did.
My name's Mrs. Maybe, and today I'm reading The Owl's Lesson. Swallows and swifts flew high above the head of Percy the park keeper. Soon they would be off on their long winter holidays. Some birds had already gone. Percy was thinking how nice it would be to join them, but his thoughts were soon brought back down to earth. "Percy, look what we found." Just ahead of him, a squirrel friend and the mole were standing over a heap of twigs. "Hello," said Percy. "That looks like an old nest." He picked it up. "I shouldn't think anyone lives in it now." "Then you'd be wrong," said a small voice. A small feathery head stuck itself out from beneath the twigs. "I live in it, and you're holding me upside down." "I'm sorry," said Percy, and he turned the nest over. "I thought you would have gone with your friends and relations." "I can't fly," said the little bird. "I didn't get the hang of it." "Oh dear," Percy began, but he wasn't allowed to finish. "Good morning." It was the owl. "Owl," called Percy, "can you help? This little fellow can't fly." "Flying," said the owl as she swooped overhead. "Nothing to it," she hooted, as she went into an impressive spin. "You just flap and go." The owl shot up into the air and out of sight. Almost at once she was back again, flying just above their heads. "You see," she cooed, "it's easy. Just look out," shouted Percy. Thump! The owl hit a pine tree. Pine cones rained down on the squirrel and the mole, followed by an owl in an untidy daze and a heap. "Well," said Percy, "I think there's a lesson for us all there." "Percy," said the squirrel, "have you got any string?" Percy felt in his pocket. "Here's a piece," he said. "Why do you want that?" The squirrel jumped to his feet. "Come on," he said. "I'll give you a piggyback." Percy looked puzzled as the squirrel began to climb a tree with a very nervous passenger on his back. "He needs to get used to heights," explained the squirrel. When he reached the top, the squirrel tied the string between the two branches. "It's a tightrope," he said. "Come on, follow me." Balancing carefully, the squirrel stepped onto the string. The little bird bravely followed. "Hooray!" cheered the mole. "Well done," called Percy. "We'll have you taken to the air in no time." At that very moment, with a twang, one of Squirrel's knots came loose, and the tightrope walkers found themselves falling. The squirrel managed to grab the end of the string, and the little bird didn't. As he looked down, he expected to see the ground rushing towards him, but instead he saw Percy holding out his cap. The little bird fell right into Percy's cap, but so hard that he bounced straight back out of it again. "Oh no," shouted Percy. "He's going to fall into those thorn bushes. Fly, fly." And as if he'd been doing it all of his life, that's just what the little bird did. He flew away from the thorns and up into the air and perched at the top of the tree. "Don't stop," called the owl. "You can go after your friends and relations now." The little bird looked delighted. "I will," he called back. "Thank you, everybody." And with that, he was off over the treetops. "Don't mention it," said a voice, dangling from a piece of string halfway up a tree. "Don't mention it," said Squirrel.
Hello, I'm Mrs. Rogers, and today I'm going to be reading How to Catch a Star by Oliver Jeffers. Once there was a boy, and the boy loved stars very much. Every night the boy watched the stars from his window and wished he had one of his very own. He dreamed how this star might be his friend. They would play hide and go seek and take long walks together. The boy decided he would try to catch a star. He thought that getting up early in the morning would be best, because then the star would be tired from being up in the sky all night. So the next day he set out at sunrise, but he could not see a star anywhere. He sat down and waited for one to appear. He waited, and he waited, and ate lunch, and waited, and after dinner he waited some more. Finally, just before the sun was about to go away, he saw a star. The boy tried to jump up and grab it, but he could not jump high enough. So very carefully, he climbed to the top of the tallest tree he could find, but the star was still way out of reach. He thought he might lasso the star with the lifebelt from his father's boat, but it was much too heavy for him to carry. He thought he could fly up in his spaceship and just grab the star, but his spaceship had run out of petrol last Tuesday when he flew to the moon. Perhaps he could get a seagull to help him fly up into the sky to reach his star, but the only seagull he could find didn't want to help at all. The boy thought he would never catch a star. Just then, he noticed something floating in the water. It was the prettiest star he had ever seen. Just a baby star. It must have fallen from the sky. He tried to fish the star out with his hands, but he couldn't reach it. Then he had an idea. The star might wash up on the shore. He ran back along the jetty to the beach. Then he waited and walked and watched and waited. And sure enough, the star washed up on the bright golden sand. The boy had caught a star of his very own.
Hello, I'm Mrs. Johnson, and I'm going to be reading you Paddington. Mr. and Mrs. Brown first met Paddington on a railway platform. In fact, that was how he came to have such an unusual name for a bear, because Paddington was the name of the station. The Browns were waiting to meet their daughter Judy when Mr. Brown noticed something small and furry near the left luggage office. "It looks like a bear," he said. "A bear?" repeated Mrs. Brown. "On Paddington Station? Don't be silly, Henry. There can't be." But Mr. Brown was right. It was sitting on an old leather suitcase marked "Wanted on Voyage," and as they drew near, it stood up and politely raised its hat. "Good afternoon," it said. "May I help you?" It's very kind of you, said Mr. Brown, but, well, as a matter of fact, we were wondering if we could help you. You are a very small bear, said Mrs. Brown. Where are you from? The bear looked around carefully before replying, Darkest Peru. I'm not really supposed to be here at all. I'm a stowaway. You don't mean to say you've come all the way from South America on your own, exclaimed Mrs. Brown. Whatever did you do for food? Unlocking the suitcase, the bear took out an almost empty glass jar. I ate marmalade, it said. Bears like marmalade. Mrs. Brown looked at the label around the bear's neck. It said, quite simply, please look after this bear. Thank you. Oh, Henry, she cried, we can't leave him here all by himself. There's no knowing what might happen next. Can't he come and stay with us? Stay with us? Repeated Mr. Brown nervously. He looked down at the bear. Well, would you like that? He asked. That is, he added hastily, if you have nothing else planned. Oh, yes, replied the bear. I'd like that very much. I've nowhere to go, and everyone seems in such a hurry. That settles it, said Mr. Brown. Now you must be thirsty after your journey. Mr. Brown, can you get some tea while I go and meet our daughter Judy? But Mary, said Mr. Brown, we don't even know its name. Mrs. Brown thought for a moment. I know, she said. We'll call him Paddington. After the station. Paddington, the bear tested it several times to make sure. Yes, it sounds very important. Mr. Brown tried it out next. Follow me, Paddington, he said. I'll take you to the snack bar. Mr. Brown was as good as his word. Paddington had never seen so many snacks on one tray, and he didn't know which to try first. He was so hungry and thirsty, he climbed up on the table to get a better look. Mr. Brown turned away, pretending he had tea with a bear on Paddington Station every day of his life. It was quite normal. Henry, cried Mrs. Brown when she arrived with Judy. What are you doing to that poor bear? Paddington jumped up to raise his hat, and in his haste, he trod on a strawberry tart, skidded on the cream, and fell over backwards into his cup of tea. I think we'd better go before anything else happens, said Mr. Brown. Judy took hold of Paddington's paw. Come along, she said. We'll take you home, and you can meet Mrs. Bird and my brother Jonathan. Mr. Brown led the way to a waiting taxi. Number 32, Windsor Gardens, please, he said. The driver stared at Paddington. Bears is extra, he growled. Sticky Bears is twice as much. And make sure none of it comes off on my interior. It was clean when I set out this morning. The sun was shining as they drove out of the station, and there were cars and big red buses everywhere. Paddington waved to some people waiting at a bus stop, and several of them waved back. It was all very friendly. Paddington tapped the taxi driver on the shoulder. It isn't a bit like Darkest Peru, he announced. Ugh, the man jumped at the sound of Paddington's voice. Cream, he said bitterly. Cream and jam all over my coat. He slid the window shut behind him. Oh dear, Henry, murmured Mrs. Brown. I wonder if we're doing the right thing. Fortunately, before anyone else had time to answer, they arrived at Windsor Gardens, and Judy helped Paddington onto the pavement. Now you're going to meet Mrs. Bird, she said. She looks after us. She's a bit fierce at times, but she doesn't really mean it. I'm sure you'll like her. Paddington felt his knees begin to wobble. I'm sure I shall, if you say so, he replied. The thing is, will she like me? Goodness gracious, exclaimed Mrs. Bird. What have you got here? It's not a what, said Judy. It's a bear called Paddington, and he's coming to stay with us. A bear, said Mrs. Bird, as Paddington raised his hat. Well, he has good manners, I'll say that for him. I'm afraid I stepped on a jam tart by mistake, said Paddington. I can see that, said Mrs. Bird. You better have a bath before you're very much older. Judy can turn it on for you. I dare say you'll be wanting some marmalade too. I think she likes you, whispered Judy. Well, Paddington had never been in a bathroom before, and while the water was running, he made himself at home. First of all, he tried writing his new name in the steam on the mirror. Then he used Mr. Brown's shaving foam to draw a map of Peru on the floor. It wasn't until a drip landed on his head that he remembered what he was supposed to be doing. He soon discovered that getting into a bath is one thing, but it's quite another matter getting out again, especially when it's full of soapy water. Paddington tried calling out, "Help!" At first in a quiet voice, so as not to disturb anyone, then very loudly, "Help! Help!" When that didn't work, he began bailing the water out with his hat. But the hat had several holes in it, and his map of Peru soon turned into a sea of foam. Suddenly, Jonathan and Judy burst into the bathroom and lifted a dripping Paddington onto the floor. "Oh, thank goodness you're all right," cried Judy. "We heard you calling out." "Fancy making such a mess," said Jonathan admiringly. "You should have pulled the plug out." "Oh," said Paddington, "I never thought of that." When Paddington came downstairs, he looked so clean no one could possibly be cross with him. His fur was all soft and silky, and his nose gleamed, and his paws had lost all traces of the jam and cream. The Browns made room for him in a small armchair, and Mrs. Brown brought him a pot of tea and a plate of hot buttered toast and marmalade. "Now," said Mrs. Brown, "you must tell us all about yourself. I'm sure you must have lots of adventures." "I have," said Paddington earnestly. "Things are always happening to me. I'm that sort of a bear." He settled back in the armchair. "I was brought up by my Aunt Lucy in darkest Peru," he began. "But she had to go into a home for retired bears in Lima." He closed his eyes thoughtfully, and a hush fell over the room as everyone waited expectantly. After a while, when nothing happened, they began to get restless. Mr. Brown tried coughing. Then he reached across and poked Paddington. "Well, I never," he said. "I do believe he's fast asleep." "After all that's happened to him," said Mrs. Brown, "is it any wonder?"
And that completes our assembly time this morning. Thank you very much for everyone who's tuned in. A reminder that this Friday we've got our beach themed disco coming up and our non-school uniform day. Only 2 more sleeps now. We will be back live at 4 o'clock for Today at PAL. I'd love to see all the work that you're getting up to in virtual school. Please do send me your work through. I can't wait to join you live again at 4 o'clock.